What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Scent Bubble. This looks like an episode of Hot Takes, but it's not. I'm in the car a lot, and so when I think of concepts from this point forward, I'm going to just do videos on them and drop them as regular videos. With that being said, no intro. For those of y'all that follow the channel, you know what this is. You're about to hear a little bit of rant from me. But today I would like to talk about projection, sillage, and longevity. I'll probably make a more expanded video about this later, but I want to give you guys kind of the snapshot reference guide to this conversation because I hear a lot of people talk about it. What's the projection? What's the sillage? What's the longevity? I don't mean to say that in a mocking way. It is an important question, but I think there's a lot of factors that people don't discuss with those elements. They kind of just look for little trigger words like weak, beast mode, projects, you know what I'm saying? And we don't really unpack that. Sometimes people take it a step further and say things like 4 to 6 feet of projection, great sillage, room filler, and things like that. And I think that we need to define these terms harder so that you can put it in context with answering this question. Are these things relevant to my fragrance purchase? And if so, why? Because if you decide not to get a fragrance due to projection, sillage, and longevity, then you better have a good reason, because you may have an awesome fragrance that doesn't check any of those boxes. And will you pass on an awesome fragrance simply because it doesn't project, have a scent trail, or have longevity? Maybe. But maybe more often than not, you'll find that rather than using those elements to determine whether or not you will buy a fragrance, you will first and foremost ask, is this fragrance incredible? And if it is incredible, then learning about projection, sillage, and longevity becomes valuable information so that you can manipulate and properly use your fragrance so that it does what you need it to do. Now, let's define these terms real quick. What is projection? Projection is how much a fragrance radiates or extends off of you, the source of the fragrance. The fragrance is on you. Look at it like a sound wave from a microphone. How much, when I'm standing still, does a fragrance radiate and go off into the air? At what distance, right? 1 foot of projection, 2 feet of projection. If I'm standing right here and somebody is 6 feet away and they can smell my fragrance without me moving, that's 6 feet of projection, so on and so forth. Projection is important to some extent because it will tell you how loud your fragrance sings when you are not moving. Sillage, in a lot of ways, is very similar to projection, but it has a slight caveat. Sillage is how much the fragrance lingers or stays in the air when you are not around. So if I walk in a straight line, I like to refer to it as the tail, the echo, what's left behind. As you're walking and leaving a space, how long will the fragrance remain in the air? And it's a trail because as you're walking, it's almost like a moving projection, but as you're moving, you're leaving excess behind. So don't think of it as if you have 4 feet of projection and you're walking in a straight line, that 4 feet of projection is going to follow you. It will, but a sillage will also be left behind. So technically speaking, if you walk from here to here and your projection is only this much, even when you're over here, you will have a trail that is on a clock. As time goes on and that stuff remains in the air, this part will slowly dissipate. this part of the trail will slowly dissipate and dissipate and dissipate until you get back to the projection range. And the projection range always stays for the longest amount of time, pretty much the life of the longevity of the fragrance, because it is still coming from the source. Not because it's lingering around, but because the source has a projection range of a certain amount that stays fairly active. Obviously, over time, the projection range shrinks once the fragrance starts to dissipate in its entirety. But let's say you have, 3 hours of longevity. For most of that longevity period, your projection range will always stay fairly similar until the very end, and it'll slowly close the gap. And the sillage should also have its own trail that will be active so long as wherever you're moving. But then obviously as the fragrance dissipates in a longer period of time, 3 hours of longevity, 4 hours of longevity, 10 hours of longevity, typically to the end, your scent trail length will start to shrink as well, because there's not as much fragrance providing that active projection in sillage. Okay, sillage is different in projection in that wherever you walk, it's what remains and how long it remains. So there's the length of the trail, and there's the time of the trail, how long it lingers, and it's what's there when you're not. Whereas projection is something coming actively at all times from the source. So if you have 2 feet of projection, no matter where you go with at least a 2-foot radius, you will always have, that's your scent bubble, your projection. And the fragrance is constantly projecting out that range. So it's almost like a never-ending sillage range. But the sillage is separately used to define when you leave a space. Again, in the walking straight line thing, all this space over here, when you're walking that way, is space that you're no longer in. You're all the way over here now. Sillage is what's left and how long the fragrance stays in the air. And then longevity is by and large just defined as how long a fragrance lasts in any regard. If you have longevity, you always have some degree of projection and sillage. Though it's decreasing at a much slower rate, it's still, those factors or those elements are still part of the equation. But longevity typically just refers to how long does a fragrance last at all. That's why you hear phrases like skin scent or weak or beast mode. Though I would argue that beast mode kind of refers to both sillage and projection, because if you have a beast mode fragrance, the fragrance will travel and have its projection range, but its projection range is so long that you oftentimes will mistake it for sillage. Because if I'm in a room and my fragrance travels across the room and its projection is massive, even if I left the room, it would still be there, but you wouldn't know the difference between the sillage trail and the projection trail. A lot of times, in theory, the sillage trail should be weaker than your projection or your scent bubble, because that has a closer expiration date on its dissipation. Hopefully all that makes sense. We're getting super nerdy here, but that's what the episode's about. You wanted to hear about it, so here I am. I think a lot of people only use these elements to determine whether or not they will buy the fragrance, and that's all they do. But the reality is, guys, if a fragrance is awesome, you should care about all of them. Not in terms of making your purchase, but in terms of using your purchase to its maximum benefit. If I buy a car, brand new, the car I'm in right now is a brand new 2025 vehicle. Why would I not learn about the vehicle? Why would I not read the instruction manual? If I don't read the manual on the car, I'm only driving it. I might not use the AC. I might not know how to use the infotainment system. I might not know how it treks on the road when I drive. I might not know how long of distances it can travel before needing to gas up, etc., 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 etc. So, similarly, why buy a fragrance that you love similar to the car and not learn about the fragrance to maximize, in this case, projection, sillage, and longevity? You can manipulate these elements. You can have good hygiene. You can wear a lotion. You can wear oils. And you can combo fragrances. And you can spray them more or less. Those are tons of different elements that can drastically change performance, sillage, and longevity in a fragrance. And you should learn about them. Because if you have a weak fragrance, you can stretch it to have longer longevity. You can allow it to project for longer. Maybe you can increase the sillage trail or the scent trail, things like that. So let's say you couldn't manipulate any of those three elements. Maybe you can simply reapply. I think a lot of people hate the idea of reapplying a fragrance because to them, they think of the idea of carrying the bottle around. And the reality is that, one, travel sprays with convenient, easy to use refill options are widely available. I think on Amazon, you can get a 10, 20, or 30 pack for less than $10. That's incredible. So you could take the travel spray and it comes with a pump on the bottom, and you could simply take the cap off of your fragrance, pump, 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 and now you've got a travel spray that you can now take on the road with you and put it in your pocket, your purse, your carry-on, whatever. And so I can take a travel spray very easily and fill a travel spray with a fragrance I love in seconds. And I don't care as much about projection, sillage, and longevity, because if I love the fragrance, which is the number one rule, you got to love the fragrance, then I'm willing to sacrifice pieces of those elements and just reapply. Or spray a lot of it. Put 100 sprays on, put 20 sprays on, put 10 sprays on, or put 3 sprays on, wait till the afternoon or the evening, and put another 3 sprays on. However you can do it. There's so much room here to stretch a fragrance and to get a manipulative experience out of your fragrance so that it does what you want it to do. I don't think anyone is arguing here about those elements in terms of, I want good projection, I want good sillage, I want good longevity. I think a fragrance that has a good amount of all three of those, which good is subjective, but it's safe to say a lot of people prefer those things because they stretch a fragrance, they make it last longer, and therefore they give you more of an experience. But another X factor in this conversation is the environment. One of my favorite fragrances. Another X factor in this conversation is the environment. One of my favorite fragrances, YSL L'Homme, has terrible projection, terrible longevity. It's probably only amazing for like 2-3 hours, and I sprayed 10 to 15 sprays on, but it is the king of intimate settings, Netflix and chill, etc. And so because the fragrance is amazing, what do? I try and make it stretch. I have good hygiene. I put on lotions. Maybe I'll put on an oil, put some layering on the skin to let the fragrance sit on it for longer so that my skin doesn't eat the fragrance alive quickly. Here's another factor. Maybe you're in an environment where you don't need projection. Maybe you're in an office and you're not trying to have your fragrance travel across the room. You need your fragrance to have a small scent bubble and maybe some good longevity. It's not always, I want 10 out of 10 on everything. Sometimes you need a quiet fragrance that lasts a long time, and you might have to manipulate it to do that. But there are some fragrances with small projection bubbles that have great longevity or moderate or whatever. So knowing your environment, how you're going to use a fragrance will greatly impact how much you care about these things. If I'm at a concert, maybe I need the fragrance to have some good projection or some beast mode qualities to it, because there's so many different aromas and body odor in the air. I want my fragrance to cut through. So as you can see, the utility behind an office fragrance is way different from a concert fragrance. The utility of an intimacy fragrance might change as well. It's not just black or white. a fragrance that I'm using for Netflix and chill might be drastically different from how I use an intimate fragrance if I'm taking the girl out for a restaurant, you know, to eat dinner or to go to a movie or whatever. A movie, we're going to be 1 foot away. Do I want a fragrance that projects 10 feet? No, doesn't make any sense. So all those factors come into play heavily as well. Environment plays a big role. So understanding how you're going to use the fragrance you're considering should affect how much you care about a fragrance. Listen, if you want a fragrance to project and have sillage and great longevity, and that's a big deal for you, know where you're using the fragrance and understand whether or not you're making too much of a deal out of those elements or not. You will find that the more context that in internal dialogue you have with these elements about a fragrance, the better your decisions will be, and the more you'll realize there's a lot of great fragrances out there that might not be the best projectors or sillage or beast mode fragrances that are incredible fragrances not worth overlooking. Let me know what your guys' experience is with this. I can give you guys plenty of examples. We'll save that for a later video on instances where I didn't need as much of those elements and still enjoyed the heck out of a great fragrance, and other scenarios where I needed a fragrance to travel and I use it in certain environments, or how I extend a fragrance, or how I even layer a fragrance. A lot of times you guys will see with my ebooks, I might add a fragrance to another fragrance simply to give it longevity, not just to manipulate it and change it into another fragrance or to enhance certain elements. Or I might use an oil to both extend a fragrance and to provide another accord or element that is more prominent in a fragrance. Maybe I want the vetiver to stick out, but I also get the performance because I put more chemicals together. Anyways, I hope this video was helpful for you guys. Let me know in the comments what your experience is with this conversation. If there's anything you disagree with, I'm just spitting knowledge about my journey and what I'm learning. And so it's not a one size fits all. And in some cases, it may be my truth and not yours. You know what I'm saying? So hopefully this was helpful for you. And I hope you found this video to be interesting. Let me know in the comments below. If this was a good conversation, we can do more part 2, part 3, part 4, etc. to this conversation or others like it. This was the Scent Bubble. Hope you guys have a blessed week. And until next time, peace.